Hello everybody and welcome back to Escape Room Pittsburgh. We got a shorter video for you guys today. This is going to be just a little overview of one of the props that we built for the winter 2022 season. This beautiful little mailbox to Santa. Okay, so it's not that beautiful. I took off a lot of the decals already and some of the extra decorations that we had because they all went back down into the vault because it's now midway through January. But this was just a wonderful little addition to the lobby that we installed specifically for the winter season because we wanted to have something a little bit extra for people to do. Usually during the holiday times is when we see a lot of people coming in from out of town, which means a lot of people are sitting in the lobby either waiting for a bus, their Uber, or just waiting to figure out where they're going to go and get lunch next. So we did two things. One, I revamped a lot of the puzzles in our lobby. We created 5 new puzzles to put out in the lobby during our Halloween event. So I just went through and kind of tinkered a little bit, tried to make them a little bit better themed for a year-round experience. And then the other thing we did was put out this mailbox. So the mailbox all starts, it was actually on top of the mailbox, there were some written instructions. These were more specifically how to mail it back after you'd completed it. Like I mentioned, I already took off some of the decoration, but there was another decorative piece that actually told you where to get your letter to Santa. This is where the real fun begins. So you may notice with this letter, Santa's name is there, but the address is missing. To be able to send the letter to Santa, we had to unfold the origami envelope. There's a gold card in here. We'll get to that in a bit. That's very important to actually making the mailbox function. But inside there were just some little puzzles. Just some additional fun things that you could do while you waited, for your bus to get here, whatever it may be. And these were centered a lot more around children's puzzles. We wanted these to be very easy because I didn't foresee a lot of adults wanting to send a letter to Santa. So this was geared more towards the younger audience because again, it's the holiday season. People are going to be coming in with their whole family. So we have our letter. Let's pretend like we solved this correctly. And I honestly don't remember what the answer is anymore. But the important card, like I mentioned, the important part is this gold card. And we put just a little piece of cardstock on so that they could write their name, address, etc., so that we could send them some goodies afterwards as well. But gold card is very important. We slide it back into the envelope. Up here on the top, I'll show you this just here in a second. There is a slot for you to insert your envelope. And if you have sent your letter correctly, or addressed it correctly, we should say, drawer pops open, reach inside. When we were running this, it was filled with little toys and trinkets and little candies, just something a little extra for them to take home with them. So now it's time to get into how it works. The reason that, I'm gonna grab my letter back real quick. The reason that this gold card is so important is because the way this whole puzzle works is that it relies on a capacitance proximity sensor, which is just a big word to say it's a sensor that waits for something to pass in front of it. When it does, it says, yes, something is in front of me, trip whatever you have connected to me. The issue was, we originally made these out of regular printer paper. It wasn't thick enough to trip the sensor. We tried a heavy grade cardstock. It still wasn't enough to trip the sensor. We tried putting different objects inside of the envelope that would actually stick to it, like metal tape and other adhesives. They would trip the sensor maybe 60% of the time, but can you imagine the look on a child's face if they go to send a letter to Santa and nothing happens? We got it to go through 100% of the time once we added in these little gold cards. I think they're made of a colored aluminum. Yeah, you can kind of see here on the edge where the gold is fading off. I'm pretty sure these are just aluminum cards, and it did exactly what I wanted it to. It had enough thickness that it would trip the sensor when it passed, and with the size of the hole that I made, and I created almost like a funnel so that it would go directly over top of the sensor, it worked perfectly 100% of the time. Everybody left with toys, everybody left with candy. God, I love Christmas. So the next thing I'm gonna do, I already took off the left side so that I could get in and work with some stuff. But I'm gonna take off the front side and the other side so that we can take a little bit of a closer peek at the electronics that make this whole thing run. All right, what a better moment to come back into the video than that. So, your letter to Santa goes into the top. This is just that little instruction again telling you how to refold your origami envelope. And here we'll see a little side view of what that slot looks like inside. So keep in mind, the paper is not thick enough to trip this capacity sensor here, but as soon as I move this gold card in front of it, it trips this mag lock here. You can see we have the plate attached to the drawer itself. And then inside would be little candies, toys, trinkets, like I mentioned. The actual electronics of how it works, we can see up here a little bit. This wiring took me a little bit because this was the first capacitance sensor I actually installed. And it's kind of difficult to tell there, but that pigtail actually has 3 wires coming out of it when I was only expecting 2. I'll explain that here in a second, but as soon as the metal is introduced in front of the sensor, that is what we see flipping the relay here. It stays on for a few seconds and then goes away. And as soon as that relay is off, that means that the mag lock is ready to relock itself. Now, one thing that I wish I would have done was tried out a couple of different sensors, but literally this was the only one I could find at a moment's notice when we had the idea to build this thing just a few weeks before winter even started. So I knew I was limited by the type of sensor I was using. It may have done better with just a more general motion sensor, or even putting a reflected backing here, and using what are they called? The kind of sensors that uses lasers and it fires it out and reflects it back, and when something goes in the middle, that's what trips the sensor. But this is none of those. This is just detecting when something dense enough moves in front of it. So I was limited in that regard. And I think it was probably for the better because I did learn a lot. Because this sensor up there, that capacity sensor, is an NPN sensor and not a PNP sensor like I'm used to working with. And the best way to describe it might be with a picture. Hold on. Ignore the math down here. It's not going to make sense and it's really not important to this video. But this is just a visual representation of that sensor. My brown is my positive that is always pushing positive power into the sensor and waiting to return out of it somewhere. When you the sensor in its normal state is looking for negative in the blue. So as long as these are driving the power, it just runs normally and it's in its off state, we'll say. However, as soon as something is introduced to that sensor that causes it to trip, it instead uses the power through the black wire. And that black wire is actually what is feeding the relay up at the top to cause it to flip. Drawn out like that, it sounds super, super simple, right? But for some reason, when I was putting it together, I just couldn't wrap my brain around the switching negative. And I think part of it is just because of the components and pieces that I've worked with before. I'm just going to throw a number out there, but I'm going to say 80% of components that you'll find in America and in most of the world are PNP and not NPN sensors, components, whatever you want to call them. NPN sensors are a lot more common in, from what I know, Japan and some more Asian regions that surround Japan, but most of the rest of the world uses PNP things. Reason being, well, I don't know if it's the reason being, but from what I've been told, it's a lot safer to switch on and off the positive. So that NPN, you notice it was switching from one negative wire to the other negative wire, and that was how the power was being transferred. The brown wire, or my brown wire or the positive was constantly flowing, which doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it can cause issues if something fails. So working with an NPN sensor with a PNP type of mindset took a little bit of more thought to wrap around. But in the end, it all came out fine. We did have to install a separate power supply for the mag lock itself. Even though it said it would run off of 12 volts, we had to give it 24. I'm still not sure why. but I'm gonna assume it was just a manufacturing error because this thing was fresh out of the box. And I think the thing that I learned the most out of this whole build wasn't even anything from the construction side, which I had plenty of flaws on. My sideboards weren't ripped straight. It might be a little difficult to see here, but these boards are all rhombuses, essentially, really bad rhombuses. None of them are actually straight. And even if I did cut them straight, I didn't build the frame itself to be square. I didn't do it on purpose. I wanted to make it square. I'm just really bad at carpentry. So even if I had ripped these boards correctly, the frame wasn't gonna let me, and I didn't even notice it until I installed these drawer slides. When the drawer came forward, that was when I learned, actually you might be able to see it there. If you can see the space between the walls, you can see that, oh, this one's easier to notice. This one's got a lot of space on it, and as it slides forward, it loses less and less space. That is not a perspective shift because of the camera work. That is legitimately me being a bad carpenter, or a bad woodworker. I don't know if you need like a license to be a carpenter. I'm not one of those people. I think the thing I got the most out of it was that people really enjoy holding a physical item in your hand. Sure, some escape rooms will give you physical souvenirs as you leave. If you break one of the props in the escape room and you ask your game master nicely enough, maybe they'll let you take a piece of it home with you. But generally, for the majority of escape rooms, at least in America that I've played, when you leave the escape room, you're leaving with the photo you take after your game and the memories that you made with the people along the way. And that's awesome. Usually that's more than enough, especially when I go play escape rooms. I don't think about the room itself. I think about the most exciting thing that happened in this room and how it made me and all my friends laugh and have a good time. But there's something extra about having a physical thing to take with you. Even though this thing was only filled with cheap little, like I said, toys and souvenirs, and it was mostly candy. Most kids took the candy out of here, and I don't blame them. I took a lot of the candy out of here. But being able to walk out the door with something physically in your hand, I don't know, it's hard to describe, but it made a huge difference to the people who played through this, and it was a different type of enjoyment, we'll say. Not a different type, maybe a more focused. They had an object that they could focus all that happiness into, and even if it was a chocolate that they ate, that's just one more thing to cement the good time that they had in their brain. But that's enough about game psychology, because I'm not a psychologist, and remember, I'm also not a carpenter or an electrician. So if you want to do this at home, please go watch people smarter than I am. But I digress. That is going to be all for today. Thank you so much for joining me here at Escape Room Pittsburgh. We'll see you next time.